Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please state and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name is Evie Nguyen. First name is Evie. Last name is Nguyen.
And where do you work?
I'm a forensic scientist at the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory in the Trace Evidence section.
How long have you been there?
Coming up on 6 years.
And what are your job duties in the trace evidence section?
I'm responsible for the examination, the interpretation, the report writing, and then the occasional testimony of trace evidence materials. Right now, I'm trained in hair analysis and in primer gunshot residue analysis.
And can you explain for the jury what a forensic hair examiner does?
Sure. So for hair analysis, typically I'm receiving items of evidence involved in criminal investigations and processing them to remove any hairs that may be present. Examples of items I may receive include sexual assault kits, so the underpants or the pubic hair combings within those sexual assault kits I will process. Other examples could be taping items from various items at a crime scene. If you think of a taping item similar to using a lint roller to remove hair from your clothing, we use fingerprint tape and just pat the surface of an item. It could be clothing, it could be bedding, it could be a vehicle interior, so multiple items that I may process for hair. Typically, a hair analysis is either a microscopic hair comparison between questioned hairs from the evidence and known standards collected from individuals, or a screen for DNA examination.
And what is your general educational and work background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Polymer and Color Chemistry from North Carolina State University, as well as a minor in Forensic Science. And I also have a Master's of Science in Forensic and Investigative Science from West Virginia University. Throughout my studies, I interned at both the Trace Evidence section of the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory, as well as in the chemistry unit of the FBI laboratory. And then upon finishing my master's degree, I was hired into my current position within the Trace Evidence section.
And what specialized training do you have in hair examination?
When I was first hired into this position, I went through an approximate year-long internal training program for hair analysis that included history of hair analysis, current methodology that we use, written and practical examinations, shadowing casework, performing mock casework, and then it all resolved in a mock courtroom experience to be released into hair analysis. From then on, I've had the opportunity to participate in continuing education credits as they come available. So I've had a few hair-related workshops at regional forensic conferences, and then I've also been able to attend a microscopy course at the McCrone Research Institute in Chicago.
And approximately how many hair case records have you worked since being released to casework?
I was released in 2021, and since then it's been over 350 hair case records.
And do you have a CV that describes your educational and professional experience?
I do.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Nguyen, I will show you what I've marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 146 and ask you if you recognize that.
I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 146?
This was my CV at the time that I completed the analysis in this case. I do have a more current CV, but this was accurate as of that time.
And what's the date on there?
September 8th, 2025.
And is it a complete and accurate copy of your CV as of September 8th, 2025?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this time I would move State's 146 for the evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, States 146 will be admitted.
And Your Honor, at this time I would tender Ms. Nguyen as an expert in forensic hair analysis.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Then the witness will be tendered as an expert in forensic hair analysis.
Ms. Nguyen, can you explain for the jury how a hair analysis is conducted in your laboratory?
Sure. So at our laboratory, we have two main routes that a hair analysis will generally take, and I mentioned them previously. So a microscopic hair comparison or a screen for DNA examination. So how analysis normally starts is I receive an item of evidence, process it to see if there are hairs present. If there are, I will determine if they are human or animal. And then if there are human hairs present, I'll proceed with either the comparison or the screen for DNA examination. So I believe I did both in this case, so I'll explain both of those. For the microscopic hair comparison, I have the questioned human hairs from the evidence items, and then head hair or pubic hair standards were able to be collected from the individuals involved in the case for me to compare those questioned hairs to. We will only do comparisons on either head or pubic hairs because those are the regions of your body that have the most distinguishing characteristics for us to be able to compare them to a standard. So how that normally goes is I have two different levels of characteristics that I'll look at with these hairs. I start with things I can just observe with my eyes. Those are called macroscopic characteristics. So those can be things like color, general shape. So is it straight, wavy, curly, general length and thickness. And then I will move on to microscopic characteristics. So at that point, I will need to use a microscope. And for a hair comparison, I use a comparison microscope. And that is basically two regular microscopes that are attached with one eyepiece. So I can see two samples at the same time under the same lighting conditions. So examples of microscopic characteristics that I'll look at, you can think of a hair under a microscope like a wooden yellow number 2 pencil. So starting with that outer yellow paint layer, there is a cuticle layer to your hair. That's the outer layer. It's made up of scales. So I will look at that region to see if it is clear, if there is some color to it, if it is damaged, the scale pattern in that area. Then I'll move on to the wood grain of the pencil. You can think of that as the cortex region of the hair. That is where pigment particles are held. So I will look at the general size and shape and pattern of those particles, their color as well. You can then move on to the central core of the hair. That's called the medulla. You can think of that like the lead running through the center of a pencil. So the medulla may either be present or absent, and if it is present, it can have several different patterns. It can be a solid line, it can be dashed kind of like a passing lane on the road, or it can have an inconsistent pattern. So there's several things I can look at under the microscope to see, do the characteristics that I'm seeing within this questioned hair fall within the range of the several hairs that I'm looking at in the standard collected from an individual. And the conclusions that will result from that sort of analysis is microscopically consistent with. So this questioned hair falls within the range of the hairs in this standard. Inconclusive, maybe there's some similarities, but also some differences, or the hair is limited in some nature that I can't do a full comparison, or microscopically different. So the characteristics in this questioned hair do not fall within the range of what I'm seeing in the known standard. So that's hair comparison. And then the other half of what we can do with hair analysis is a screen for DNA examination. So we would do this if the individuals involved are unknown, or if for some reason we don't have hair standards available from everyone in the case. So that is simply looking at human hairs that we have in evidence items to see if they have a root attached. And if they do have a root, does it have enough tissue present that it may be suitable for DNA analysis at our laboratory? And if so, I cut the root off that hair, put it in a tube, package it, and send it to our biology section for them to perform a DNA analysis on that hair. So that's hair analysis in a nutshell.
And is this methodology generally accepted and standard within your field?
Yes, it is.
And did you perform a hair analysis in this case?
Yes.
Did you use the methodology you just described to perform that analysis?
Yes, I did.
And did you prepare written reports summarizing your finding and conclusions in this case?
Yes, I believe I had 2 reports.
And as with the previous witness, I have included the full copy of both reports as States Exhibit 147 on a disc, and I have the summary pages marked as 147A as in Alpha and 147B as in Bravo.
Any objection?
I have no objection. I don't know if she said she was admitting them or asking them to be admitted, but there's no objection once she makes that in the fact that they are being differentiated between 147, 147A, and 147B.
All right. I guess maybe I should let you introduce those through the witness first.
Sure. May I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'll show you what I've marked as exhibits 147A and 147B and ask you if you recognize these two items.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
And what's contained in states 147A?
These are my 2 lab reports from the 2 examinations I did in this case.
And are those the complete lab reports?
So depending on the terminology, we refer to the lab report as the full case report that's released by our system when we release a case record. So that includes not just the results, but also any communication, the chain of custody, all of the documentation involved in this case. These documents are laboratory report summaries, so these are just my results in the case, not all of the documentation.
And do those appear to be complete and accurate copies of your summary reports?
They do.
Here, this time I would move states 147A and B into evidence.
And I apologize if I'm not getting it. What's the difference between states 147A and 147B?
I did 2 different exams in this case, so they're 2 different dated lab reports. So one analysis and then another report of another analysis.
Give me the dates on them at least,
Yes.
so we can have something separating them.
Okay. The first is June 24th, 2024. Yes, this is 147A. And then 147B is July 29th, 2024.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Still no objection?
No objection, Judge. Thank you.
We'll admit states 147, which is the full report, states 147A, which is the summary report dated June 24th, 2024, 147B, which is the summary report from July 29th, 2024.
Thank you, Your Honor. And may I reapproach the witness?
You may.
Ms. Nguyen, I'll show you states exhibits 116 and 117, which have previously been admitted into evidence in this matter. Ask you if you recognize those items.
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize them?
I recognize these items by our laboratory barcode, which contains our unique lab case number, our unique lab item numbers for each item, as well as my initials and date on the barcode of when I received these items into my custody.
And did you analyze pieces of what's contained in states 116 and 117 as a part of your examination in this case?
Yes.
And Madam D, I apologize. What is states 116 and 117?
116 is Devin Clark's sexual assault kit, and 117 is Lyric Woods' sexual assault kit.
Thank you.
And we'll start there. Can you please describe for the jury your examination pertaining to your lab report dated June 24th, 2024?
Sure. So at this time, the evidence that I had received was the 2 sexual assault kits. I did not have, so within the sexual assault kits, the associated head hair standards and pubic hair standards for those individuals are inside. But at the time of starting the exam, I did not have a head hair standard from Issiah Ross. So I wasn't able to do the full comparison at that time. So I moved forward with a limited examination. It was a screen for DNA examination, but with an additional criteria. So previously I mentioned that we will do comparisons on either head hairs or pubic hairs. It also depends on the timeline between when an incident occurred and when these standards were collected. Since your hair is a biological material that's consistently changing throughout your life, there is a growth cycle associated with when these hairs replace themselves. So we have a cutoff of when we will accept a standard if it's been a certain amount of time from when the crime occurred, because the hairs could potentially be different than when the crime occurred. So for pubic hairs, we have a cutoff of 1 year for a standard to be collected. For head hairs, our cutoff is 5 years. So this incident occurred in 2022, and I was performing this analysis in 2024. So we were past the cutoff for pubic hairs to be suitable for a comparison at our laboratory. So the second paragraph of my results, I'm explaining this approach, and I'm saying that I have been in conversation with the Orange County Sheriff's Office in regards to obtaining a suspect head hair standard. So any macroscopic head hairs that I'm seeing in the evidence, I'll hold off on at this time to do an additional analysis at the time I have that standard. But at this time, since macroscopic pubic or body hairs are not suitable for a comparison, I'm screening those hairs for DNA at this time. So that's this first report.
Can you describe your examination with regard to lab item 10-5, the underwear taping from Miss Woods's sexual assault kit?
Item 10-5-1?
Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me.
So at this point, I'm moving forward with a screen for DNA exam on any macroscopic pubic or body hairs only. So for item 10-5-1, my results were as follows. Examination of item 10-5-1 revealed several human hairs. Some of these human hairs exhibited macroscopic head hair characteristics. Pending the submission of the suspect's head hair standard, no further analysis was performed on these hairs at this time. None of the remaining human hairs were suitable for DNA analysis at this laboratory. Animal hair was also present. No further analysis was performed on this item at this time.
And can you describe what you observed and your conclusions with regard to lab item 11-4-1, the taping from the underwear in Devin Clark's sexual assault kit?
Examination of item 11-4-1 revealed several human hairs. Some of these human hairs exhibited macroscopic head hair characteristics. Pending the submission of the suspect's head hair standard, no further analysis was performed on these hairs at this time. 2 of the human hairs had roots that may be suitable for DNA analysis at this laboratory. Due to its small size, one of the human hairs was assigned item 11-4-1-1 and prepared in its entirety for DNA analysis. The root of the other human hair was removed, assigned item 11-4-1-2, and submitted for DNA analysis. The remaining human hairs were not suitable for DNA analysis at this laboratory. Animal hair was also present. No further analysis was performed on this item at this time.
And how about for item 11-8, the pubic hair combings from Devin Clark's sexual assault kit?
Examination of item 11-8 revealed numerous human hairs, none of which exhibited macroscopic head hair characteristics. 53 of these human hairs had roots that may be suitable for DNA analysis at this laboratory. The roots of these hairs were removed, assigned items 11-8-1 through 11-8-53, and submitted for DNA analysis. The remaining human hairs were not suitable for DNA analysis at this laboratory. No further analysis was performed on this item.
And with regard to this lab report, did you examine any other items?
There was one more, item 10-9. That was the pubic hair combings from the sexual assault kit collected from Lyric Woods.
And what was the result of that examination?
Examination of item 10-9 did not reveal the presence of any hairs. No further analysis was performed on this item.
Thank you. And so then at some point, did you receive a head hair standard so that you could further your comparison?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'll show you what's previously been marked and admitted as State's Exhibit 141 and ask you if you recognize this item.
I do.
And what's it, State's Exhibit 141?
State's Exhibit 141 is the head hair sample collected from Issiah Ross.
And is that the same one that you analyzed in connection with this case?
Yes.
How can you tell that?
I can tell by our laboratory's unique barcode that has our unique case number. It has our laboratory's unique item number. And I can also tell by my date and initials on the label at the time I received the evidence.
Thank you. And so once you received that standard, did you generate an additional report dated July 29th, 2024?
Yes, I did.
And can you walk us through your findings with regard to that report?
Okay. So at this time, I had all necessary head hair standards so I could proceed with the full microscopic hair comparison. I again have another paragraph in my results that's explaining this approach. I explain that I've previously analyzed the items in this case. So I had the 2 sexual assault kits once again, and then I also had that head hair standard item. So I've previously examined the macroscopic pubic hairs and body hairs in these items. Those were the ones that I screened for DNA in the previous report. So at this time, I'm not doing any further analysis on those hairs. At this time, I'm only doing a microscopic hair comparison with any macroscopic head hairs I'm seeing in the items. And I'm comparing these head hairs to the submitted head hair standards from Lyric Woods, Devin Clark, and Issiah Ross.
And can you, excuse me, thank you. Did you re-examine item 10-5-1, the underwear taping from Ms. Woods' sexual assault kit?
Yes.
And can you describe your findings with regard to that item?
Examination of item 10-5-1 revealed the presence of 3 human hairs with macroscopic head hair characteristics. None of these hairs were macroscopically similar to the submitted head hair standards from Devin Clark or Issiah Ross. These hairs were not suitable for DNA analysis at the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory. They may be suitable for alternative DNA testing not offered by this laboratory. No further analysis was performed on this item.
And did you do further examination on item 11-4-1, the underwear taping from Mr. Clark's sexual assault kit?
Yes.
And what did that examination reveal?
Examination of item 11-4-1 revealed the presence of 2 human hairs with macroscopic head hair characteristics. One of these hairs was bland. Bland hairs lack many of the characteristics used in performing a hair comparison. Accordingly, no conclusion could be reached as to whether or not this hair could have originated from the same source as item 10-8, which was the head hair standard from Lyric Woods, or item 15, which was the head hair standard from Issiah Ross. It should be noted that this type of bland hair was present in the submitted head hair standard from Lyric Woods, item 10-8, but not in the submitted head hair standards from Issiah Ross, which was item 15, or Devin Clark, which was item 11-6. This hair is not suitable for DNA analysis at the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory. Therefore, it is recommended it be outsourced for alternative DNA testing not offered by this laboratory. The remaining hair was found to be microscopically different from the hair in items 10-8, 11-6, and 15. Microscopically different means distinct characteristics exhibited by the unknown hair were not noted within the range of characteristics present in the submitted known standards. Therefore, this hair in item 11-4-1 could not be associated with the submitted head hair standards from Lyric Woods, Devin Clark, or Issiah Ross. This hair is not suitable for DNA analysis at the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory. It may be suitable for alternative DNA testing not offered by this laboratory. No further analysis was performed on this item.
And did you examine any other items with regard to your second report dated July 29th, 24?
No.
What did you do with all of this evidence after you examined it?
Following the first or the second report?
Both.
So following the first report, I had created several root items that were to be sent down to our forensic biology section. So when we create several root items like that, we'll put them in a container. So that is listed in the report header as container C1. So that container C1 item had all of the root items created by me, along with extracts E1 and slides S1, which are items generated by forensic biology during their analysis. So those three items I transferred to the DNA section for their testing. And then the remaining items were those two sexual assault kits and all of the sub-items contained within them. I retained those for my further analysis I was going to perform. So then following that second analysis, I only had the two sexual assault kits as well as the head hair standard from Issiah Ross. And following that second analysis, I was done with everything. So I retained it for pickup, which means that I placed it back in our evidence vault for the agency to eventually come and pick up.
And did you do any further analyses regarding hair analysis in this case?
No.
Now, Ms. Wen, do you also work in the field of primer gunshot residue analysis?
I do.
And how long have you worked in that capacity?
I was released into primer gunshot residue analysis in March of 2025, so it's been a little under a year.
You previously described your general education, but what specific education, training, and experience do you have in the field of primer gunshot residue analysis?
So similar to hair analysis, I also went through an internal training program on primer gunshot residue analysis. Similarly, it contained information such as the history of the methods used to detect primer gunshot residue, the methods that we currently use now, technical information on how to operate the scanning electron microscope, which is the instrument that we use to detect primer gunshot residue in our laboratory. And it also contained information on our lab's policy on sample handling and submission guidelines, as well as casework and report writing. I shadowed casework with other GSR analysts, and I performed my own mock casework at the end to be released into primer gunshot residue analysis. And then similarly, I also keep up with continuing education for primer gunshot residue. So I've gone to a couple workshops regarding current methods in gunshot residue analysis at professional forensic conferences. And then I have also attended a scanning electron microscope user school at the instruments manufacturer in Warrendale, Pennsylvania.
And approximately how many case records have you worked in primer gunshot residue analysis?
Since March of 2025, I'd say over 30.
All right, this time I would tender Ms. Wen as an expert in primer gunshot residue analysis.
Primer, thank you. Primer gunshot
Residue analysis.
All right. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. This will be accepted and admitted as an expert in primary gunshot residue analysis.
Thank you. And can you describe for the jury what is gunshot residue?
Gunshot residue can be thought of as all of the vapors and particles that come out of a firearm at the time that it is discharged. Gunshot residue it mainly comes from the end of the barrel, but it can also escape through any available openings in the firearm, such as the ejection port. It can be made up of components from all around the weapon. It can be made up of components of the ammunition. So whether that's from the primer mix, from the propellant or the gunpowder, from the cartridge casing, or from the bullet. But it can also be made up of components from the weapon itself. So components from the gun barrel or any gun oils. So of all of those components, the portion that we're testing for at the North Carolina State Crime Lab is from the primer mix and the ammunition. These we call characteristic primer gunshot residue particles. They are rounded in shape, and they are composed of lead, barium, and antimony. They're from about 1 to 10 micrometers in size, sometimes smaller. If you think of a meter stick that's been broken into a million pieces, just one of those pieces would be a micrometer. So these particles are very small, which is why we have to use the scanning electron microscope to detect them.
And how does, or how would gunshot residue get on a person's hand or clothing?
So when a firearm is fired, the first thing that happens is the firing pin will strike the base of the cartridge case of ammunition, and it will cause the primer mix to explode. That explosion then causes a rapid burning of the propellant or the gunpowder within that ammunition, and the rapid increase in temperature and pressure inside the weapon is what propels the bullet down the barrel towards the object that it strikes. But at the same time that those rapid increase in temperatures are occurring within the weapon, the melting and then the vaporization points of the lead, barium, and antimony within that primer mix are reached, causing them to become molten droplets that will combine into particles that contain all three of those components. When they are exposed to the atmosphere, when they're released from the weapon, they quickly solidify and they will settle like dust on surfaces within close proximity to the weapon when it was discharged. So whether that be the shooter's hands or their clothing, but we also know that gunshot residue can travel greater distances along with the bullet towards the object it strikes, so it can transfer that way as well.
And does the state crime lab have policies on the testing for gunshot residue?
We do.
And can you describe what the policy is regarding the testing of hand kits or clothing of a gunshot victim?
So we will not accept items of evidence from an individual who has been a gunshot wound victim, and that is because if someone has received a gunshot wound, we already know that they were in the environment of primer gunshot residue. We also know that primer gunshot residue can settle on surfaces within close proximity to the weapon when it's discharged, as well as traveling greater distances with that bullet, potentially transferring onto the object it strikes. So since we know they were in that environment, I could not establish a timeline as to whether any gunshot residue detected on that individual was from firing a weapon or from receiving a gunshot wound. So that's why we don't accept those items.
Your Honor, that's all the questions I have for this witness. Thank you.
Mr. Trapp?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Ms. Gwynn,
Yes.
good morning.
Good morning.
So you started out talking to us about hair analysis and kind of the protocol that you take in testing this hair analysis. And I'm going to try and distill it as best I can. Okay. But you will receive evidence from a law enforcement agency, whether it's tapings or full hairs or head hairs. And then you'll have some type of other item to compare it to see if they are similar. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And in this case, there were at least 3 standards that were being compared. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, 3 head hair standards.
And then in addition to these standards, there are items of evidence that were found on the scene or found somewhere that these standards were being compared to see if they were matches. Is that an accurate assessment?
I wouldn't say matches. I would say microscopically consistent with or microscopically different with the standard that was collected. But yes, comparing.
So you were trying to look through a microscope to see if these standards were microscopically consistent with the items that were taken from, I think you said, from underwear, from other locations. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you were doing these comparisons, we'll first start with item 1051, which was the underpants from Lyric Woods. There were hairs that were found there, correct? Or taken from there?
Yes.
All right. And those hairs were then compared to Devin Clark and Issiah Ross. Is that correct?
Yes.
And neither hairs were microscopically consistent, talking about Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, with what was found in the taping from 1051, which is Lyric Woods underpants. They
were actually not macroscopically similar. So even at the level that I was just using my eyes and not the microscope, they were not similar. So I stopped at that point, but yes.
Okay. And then when you did the testing of 11.4, or maybe 11.41, which is the taping from Devin Clark's underpants, when you then did the comparisons, those also were not microscopically consistent. Is that correct?
They were not microscopically consistent. No, I had different conclusion types for each of those hairs.
Okay, but just starting there, they weren't microscopically consistent. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
All right. You then said after you did kind of your macroscopic analysis and your microscopic analysis, you would then get roots and other and maybe longer hairs to send out for DNA analysis. Is that correct?
So I did the analysis of the roots, the screen for DNA examination, before I did the comparison.
Okay.
Part of my comparison analysis is looking at those hairs to see if they do have suitable roots, but I believe during the comparison analysis, none of the hairs had suitable roots. So I did not prepare roots at that point. I had in the previous report.
And that analysis is done by a different department or a different representative at the crime lab in reference to DNA.
Yes, a different section does the DNA.
And based on what you're testifying to, your analysis didn't show any results of microscopic consistency, which would have shown any of different hairs were found on different individuals. Is that a fair assessment?
So I did not have any microscopic consistent results, no. The only result I had that was not a difference was with that bland hair in item 11-4-1, but with that bland conclusion, it's an inconclusive conclusion, so I cannot say either way.
Okay. And you did not do any testing of gunshot residue in this case, is that correct?
No, I did not.
And you were speaking with the prosecutor about protocols and policies at the crime lab.
Yes.
And one of the things you mentioned was that the crime lab does not test for gunshot residue on victims. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And you mentioned that's because the projectile could carry gunshot residue with it, and because they were involved in some type of firearm injury.
We already know that they were in the environment where primary gunshot residue was expelled, so whether that was by being in close proximity or by it traveling along with the bullet.
And does that protocol, is that a bright line rule, or are there exceptions to that rule?
There are circumstances where we will deviate from that procedure with management approval, but at first pass, we do not test victim kits.
All right. And to be clear, there wasn't even a request made for this to happen on either of these individuals. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. We don't have a gunshot residue case record in this case.
Okay. And so if individual, we'll start big and work small. Let's say an individual wasn't shot, they were stabbed. You could test for gunshot residue in that situation, couldn't you?
I could. We do have a couple other reasons that we wouldn't test a gunshot residue kit. So there's three. So one of them being if they were a victim of a gunshot wound. The second being if the kit was collected greater than 4 hours from the time that the incident occurred. Gunshot residue is easily lost with normal activity, such as rubbing hands together, putting hands in pockets. So we have a 4-hour cutoff for those kits. And then the third would be if the individual had washed their hands. Washing hands removes gunshot residue. So we would not work that kit either. But it's one of three reasons.
But in the event that the individuals did not move, did not wash their hands, remained in the same location, you would still have to get prior approval in order to perform a gunshot residue test for a victim. Is that correct?
Yes, we'd have to deviate from our typical procedure.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions, Judge.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right. May we excuse our witness, Ms. Wynn?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Ms. Wynn, thank you so much for being here. Excused from your subpoena obligations at this time.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The state will call Wendell Ivory.
Mr. After you come up here, we'll get you sworn in, okay?
Left hand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you got to give this court and jury to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Maybe.
Mr. Ivory, when you get to sit up there, make sure you're close enough to that mic, okay?
I sure will.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please state and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name is Wendell Ivory. Wendell, W-E-N-D-E-L-L, Ivory, I-V-O-R-Y.
And where do you work?
I work at the North Carolina State Crime Lab.
In what section?
I work in the forensic biology section as a forensic scientist supervisor.
And how long have you worked there?
It's been about 15 years now.
What are your job duties there?
I examine items of evidence in criminal cases for the presence of body fluids, primarily blood and semen. I will collect samples that sometimes may come from skin cells. So if it's a body fluid or skin cells, I try to develop DNA profiles from those samples. And I will also develop DNA profiles from individuals involved in the case to see if the profiles from the evidence. So I can see that if the profiles from the evidence as well as the DNA profiles from any individuals involved in the case may be same or similar or different.
And what type of education, training, and experience do you have that qualifies you as a forensic biologist?
I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in microbiology. I also have 2 master's degrees. One is in microbial biotechnology. The other is in business administration, concentrating in biosciences management. I have a certificate from my graduate school at NC State in molecular biotechnology, and I'm also certified in the area of molecular biology from the American Board of Criminalistics.
And have you testified as an expert witness in the field of forensic biology?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
It's been about 35-ish times now.
And do you have a CV that describes your educational and professional experience?
Yes, I do.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Ivory, I'll show you what I've marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 148 and ask you if you recognize this.
Yes, I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 148?
State's Exhibit 148 is a copy of my CV, which details my education as well as my professional experiences.
And is it a true and accurate copy of your CV?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this time I would move State's 148 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
States 148 will be admitted.
Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I would tender Wendell Ivory as an expert in forensic biology.
Any objection?
No objection to that, Your Honor.
Mr. Ivory will be admitted as an expert in forensic biology.
Thank you. Mr. Ivory, what is DNA?
DNA is a chemical that's found in all living organisms. You receive half of it from your mom and half of it from your dad. It's often called the genetic blueprint because it provides all the instructions needed to build, operate, and maintain our bodies. The same DNA that's in your blood is also in your skin as well as your other tissues. I use it as a forensic scientist because it helps us to distinguish one person from another. And with the technology that I use, it has been shown that with the exception of identical twins, no two people have been shown to have the same DNA profile.
We just slide that microphone just a little bit closer to you. It'll
Sure.
move if you want to slide it.
To me.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody good?
And why does the North Carolina State Crime Lab conduct DNA analysis?
It's the best method that we have to distinguish one person from another using the technology of DNA.
And can you please explain for the jury the basic procedures that are used at the crime lab when conducting DNA testing?
So I do, for this particular case, I performed body fluid analysis and DNA analysis, so I'll describe both of those. For the presumptive blood testing that I use a test called the Kasselmeyer test. And this is just a test that can indicate that blood may be present on an item. It can't conclusively identify it as blood. But it's useful for screening purposes. So if I see a reddish-brown stain, if it gives me an indication that blood is present by turning from clear to pink within 5 seconds, it's useful to understand that because that might be a suitable source for DNA analysis. So that's the presumptive blood test. For DNA analysis, it's a multi-step process, which starts with what we call extraction. And that's where you're going to take a sample and try to just crack open the cell and get the DNA out of it. For this case, I performed 2 different types of extraction. One was geared towards potential blood cells. The other was performed for the possible presence of semen, and that's called a differential extraction. So it's just basically where I'm taking one sample and I'm going to make it into 2 samples. The first sample is called fraction 1, so you might hear that in my reporting. And this is just the sample that I'm trying to isolate the DNA that could presumably come from basically the body from the person that the sample was collected from. The second part is the fraction 2 sample. And so this is where, if it has semen present, this is where the sperm cell DNA would be isolated. So sperm has a tough outer coat, and so the normal extraction chemicals are not suitable to break down that coat to get the DNA out. So I have to perform a second extraction. So whether it's the normal extraction or the differential extraction, I've got DNA, but I don't know how much I have. So I have to perform a different step, and it's called quantitation. And I'm just measuring the quantity or the amount of DNA. And this is like if you go to the grocery store, you put your produce onto the scale and you weigh it. I can do the same thing with chemicals. And so I need to understand how much my DNA weighs because the next part of the process, it's called PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction. You might have heard of that.
Which is
Polymerase chain reaction. And this is where I'm going to basically just take small copies of DNA and multiply them millions and millions of times. And in the process, I'm also going to color code it. So DNA is invisible. I need to be able to see it in the end. So once I've gotten it color-coded, I'm going to then try to separate it and detect it by size and color. And this is where it's going to generate what's basically a graphical illustration. It's a color-coded series, peaks, and numbers, sort of like an EKG, like if you go to the doctor and get your heart checked out. So the graphical illustration of the DNA profile is this color-coded series of peaks and numbers. I'm going to use that once I look at the DNA profile from an item of evidence and then compare that to the DNA profile from any individuals involved in the case to see if they're the same or similar or different.
And are the procedures you've just described been widely accepted as valid scientific tests in this community?
Yes, they have.
And what does a forensic DNA comparison involve?
So comparing the DNA profiles from an item of evidence to any profiles developed from individuals involved in the case, it can look like this. So I will interpret the DNA data, say something is real. I will say either if it's uninterpretable, which means I can't make sense of the DNA data, but if I can interpret the DNA data, I have to establish a number of contributors. So my DNA profile could be one person, meaning that it's single source, or it could be a mixture of a number of individuals, meaning that it could be 2, 3, or 4 people. I will then look at the items of evidence profile and compare that to the individuals involved in the case to see if they're the same, similar, or different. That will involve a branch of statistics. That's basically the mathematics of making up your mind. And it's just a way for you to update your belief about a thing or an event once you're presented with results like DNA results. And so there's some level of support that you need to understand. So the numbers that I will report today is called a likelihood ratio, and that's the tool that I use to update my belief about a thing or an event. And so the comparison can be the likelihood ratio will tell you something. So if the DNA results support something that we call the inclusionary hypothesis, we call this H1 in the reporting, that you look at the DNA profile from the item of evidence, you look at the DNA profile from an individual involved in the case, and they show the same or similar information, you will get a number for the likelihood ratio, and it's 1,000 or greater. So the DNA results support inclusion. On the opposite side of that, you could have a likelihood ratio of 0. That means that I've looked at the DNA profile from an item of evidence and the DNA profile from an individual involved in the case, and they are different. There's no way that that individual could be included as a possible contributor. There's a third way that the likelihood ratio could go, and it's inconclusive. And so that's when the DNA data is so limited or so unreliable that you can't really render a conclusion. So you can have a likelihood ratio where the DNA evidence supports inclusion, called hypothesis 1. That's where the likelihood ratio is 1,000 or greater. If the DNA results support exclusion, you would have a likelihood ratio of 0. And if it's inconclusive, it would be a number that is less than 1,000 in general.
And do you use a population database to provide a statistical significance to your comparison?
Yes, I do.
And can you describe how that database was derived and also how you use it in casework?
So the population database that I use was developed by a United States government organization called NIST. It's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they're an organization that supports and promotes innovation and technology in various scientific disciplines, forensics being one of them. They also provide standards for measurement, and one of the things that they measured was the pieces of DNA information that are how they exist in different populations. So they basically counted up the information in human populations and provided the numbers. I use those numbers in the calculation for the likelihood ratio that I use in my statistical reporting.
Now turning to a little bit more specific, did you analyze a number of items in connection with this case that you're here to testify about?
Yes, I did.
And did you prepare written reports summarizing your findings and conclusions?
Yes.
How many reports did you generate?
5 in total.
Your Honor, similarly, on the disc, States Exhibit 149, I have all 5 complete reports, and then may I approach the witness with what I will mark as States 149A as in Alpha, 149B Bravo, 149C Charlie, 149D Delta, and 149E Echo.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ivory, I'll show you States 149A through E and ask you if you recognize those items.
Yes, I do recognize these.
And what are those?
States Exhibit 149A through E are the reports that I drafted for this case.
And just going through them one at a time, what is the date of the report on States 149A?
This one is dated June 14th, 2024.
And States 149B?
October 25, 2024.
How about 149C?
November 21st, 2024.
149D?
September 5th, 2025.
And 149E?
January 7th, 2026.
And are those your complete reports?
This is the reports, yes.
And do they appear to be complete and accurate copies of your summary reports in this case?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, this time I would move States Exhibits 149 and then 149A through E into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. We will admit States number 149, the complete reports. Oh, there's 5 on there, is that right?
That's correct.
So States 149 is all 5 complete reports. States 149A is the summary report from June 14th, 2024. States 149B is the summary report from October 25th, 2024. States 149C is the summary report from November 21st, 2024. States 149D is the summary report from September 5th, 2025. And 149E is the summary report from January 7th, 2026. They
Thank
will all
you.
be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if I could have just one moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Ivory, taking a look at your report dated June 14th, 2024, you examined a number of items of evidence in connection with that report.
Yes.
And how did you receive those items?
I received them from the main evidence vault within the forensic biology section.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Ivory, these items have all been previously received into evidence. State's Exhibit 116, the sexual assault kit for Devin Clark. State's Exhibit 117, the sexual assault kit for Lyric Woods. State's Exhibit 139, the cheek swab for the defendant, Issiah Ross. State's 119, the blood card for Devin Clark. State's 118, the blood card for Lyric Woods. State's 71. Let me go over here. States 56, 57, 58, and 59, all of which were DNA swabs from the white GMC Terrain, all from the exterior, as well as states 68, 69, 70, and 71 DNA swabs from the white GMC Terrain, the interior. Taking a look at these items, are these the items that you examined prior to generating your lab report on June 14th of 2024?
May I take a look?
Yes.
Yes, these are the items of evidence that I associated or examined in the first case record that I examined.
And did you take a look at these three? Those three as well?
Yes.
And how are you able to recognize that these are the items of evidence that you examined?
I recognize them by their case number, their item numbers, as well as the initials and dates that I placed upon them.
Thank you. Now, when you receive your first set of evidence for a case, can you describe what process, how you start your examination?
So I would have, for any samples that were associated with the sexual assault kits, I would have performed a process called direct DNA. And that's where I'm just going to take samples from those sexual assault kit items, place them in the tube, and perform those DNA analysis steps that I told you about. Because these items presumed to have possible semen on them, I performed that differential extraction. And so I walked my way through all of the analysis steps that I described earlier to generate DNA profiles from that. Additionally, there was some blood evidence in this particular case that could be associated with blood, and so I performed the Kastle-Meyer testing for some items in this case. And then some items were also submitted for no body fluid testing analysis because they were just items that might have been associated with handling some interior surface of the vehicle.
And how do you know or get the profile for what you're comparing it to?
So for the comparison, so remember we're generating DNA profiles from items of evidence, but I also received known standards, that's known samples taken from the individuals involved in the case, and I develop those DNA profiles as well, and then I make my comparisons in that order.
And what were the lab numbers for the known standards that you received in this case?
So item 10-1, it was a blood card from Lyric Woods. I also received item 13, which is a blood card from Devin Clark, as well as item 14, which was the DNA standard for Issiah Ross.
And can you walk us through how you examined this evidence and what your conclusions were?
Would you like, it's a 7-page report, do you want me to group them? So there's the initial swabs from the exterior of the vehicle that had Kastle-Meyer testing performed. Do you want me to start there?
Yes, we will start with items, lab items 2 through 5.
All right.
Which are, let me make sure I get the exhibit numbers on the record. These are states exhibit numbers 56, 57, 58, and 59, all of which are previously entered as swabs from the right front fender of the GMC Terrain on the exterior. And if you'll just walk us through your analysis of these items.
Would you like me to read the results? Because that basically says what I did.
Maybe I'm not asking you the right question. I guess just explain what you did with the items when you received them.
Okay, so I would have examined the packaging to make sure that the inventory list of items that were submitted was what I had in hand. I would have made sure that that packaging was sealed and intact. And then once I verified that information, I would have performed the Kastle-Meyer test on the items as I opened them. I would have viewed potentially reddish-brown staining. If I saw that reddish-brown staining, I would have subjected those items to the Kastle-Meyer test to see if I could find a chemical indication for the presence of blood. If I received that positive indication for the presence of blood, I would have then taken a sample for DNA analysis.
And with regard to these items, did you receive a chemical indication for the presence of blood?
Yes, I did.
And so then what were the next steps you took in your examination?
I developed a DNA profile from those samples.
Okay. And how did you do that?
I followed those DNA process steps that we talked about from extraction all the way through the generation of a profile.
And what, if any, conclusions were you able to reach about those items?
The DNA profile obtained from the swabs from the right fender of the GMC middle tire, the right front fender of the GMC back edge of wheel well, the right front fender of GMC back edge of tire, and the right front fender of GMC passenger door. These are items 2, 3, 4, and 5 respectively. Is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. The DNA profiles obtained from the swabs from the right front fender of GMC middle of tire, right front fender of GMC back edge of wheel well, right front fender of GMC back edge of tire, and the right front fender of GMC passenger door, items 2, 3, 4, and 5 respectively, are approximately 7.2 decillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods than item 10-1, which is our H1, than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual, which is H2.
And what examinations and comparisons did you do with lab item 6?
For lab item 6, I performed just DNA analysis.
And can you describe your results and conclusions with regard to that item?
The DNA profile from the swab from the interior front passenger door handle of GMC, item 6, is being interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors. The mixture contains 3 interpretable components. The DNA profile obtained from Issiah Ross, item 14, is included as a contributor 1 of this mixture. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Carter, item 13, are excluded as contributors to this mixture. Additional DNA was present which cannot be accounted for by the standards that were provided. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Issiah Ross, item 14, and 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. Or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. The mixture DNA profile obtained from the swab from the interior passenger door handle of the GMC, item 6, is approximately 189 quintillion times more likely if it originated from Issiah Ross, item 14, and 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, H1, than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, which is H2.
And I neglected to put on the record, that was State's Exhibit number 68. And moving on to lab item 7, which is State's Exhibit 69. What examinations did you conduct and what conclusions did you reach?
I performed DNA analysis for item 7. The DNA profile obtained from the swab from the interior rear passenger door handle of the GMC is being interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors containing male DNA. The mixture contains 2 interpretable components. Component 3 is inconclusive due to an insufficient quality of recovered DNA. No comparisons to reference profiles for either inclusion or exclusion can be reported on this component. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, is included as a contributor 1 of this mixture. The DNA profiles obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, item 13 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to the interpretable components of this mixture. Additional DNA was present which cannot be accounted for by the standards provided. Given the evidence, the propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. The mixture DNA profile obtained from the swab from the interior rear passenger door handle of the GMC item 7, is 3.04 decillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and 2 unknown unrelated individuals, H1, than if it originated from 3 unknown unrelated individuals.
Now, you said with regard to that analysis that it was a mixture of 3 contributors containing male DNA, but then that Lyric was included as a contributor. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, so there are multiple individuals contributing to this sample, and so there was male DNA detected as one of those contributors.
And moving forward to lab item number 8, State's Exhibit number 70, can you describe what examination you completed and what your conclusion was?
DNA analysis was performed for item 8. The DNA profile obtained from the swab from the interior rear door handle, item 8, is being interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors. The mixture contains 3 interpretable components. The mixture contains at least 1 male profile. No conclusion can be rendered as to the contribution of the DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14, respectively, due to an inconclusive likelihood ratio result. The DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark, item 13, is excluded as a contributor to this mixture. Additional DNA was present, which cannot be accounted for by the standards provided.
And can you, I know you walked through it a little while ago, can you describe what an inconclusive likelihood ratio result means?
That's generally when you run the statistical evaluation for the likelihood ratio, and the DNA results are generally regarded as unreliable at that level. So it's below the level of 1,000 for the likelihood ratio.
And what could cause that?
Oh, limited DNA, you just don't have enough information, or the way that the proportions for the mixtures work out, that they just don't meet our thresholds within the laboratory for reliable data or reporting.
And moving on to lab item 9, State's Exhibit 71, can you describe your analysis with regard to that item?
Item 9, only DNA analysis performed on that item. The DNA profile obtained from the swab from the interior driver door handle of item 9 is uninterpretable due to the complexity of the mixture and due to the limited data amount obtained. The profile is not suitable for comparisons.
And for what reason would it be unsuitable?
So for this particular sample, I had a problem trying to establish a number of contributors. So it was a low-level DNA sample that was a mixture. And because of that, I could not make sense of the data. So I called it uninterpretable.
Now the next items are items 10-2, 10-3, and 10-7. What are those items?
Item 10-2 are described as vaginal swabs. Item 10-3 are described as anal and perianal swabs. And item 10-7 is described as breast swabs.
And where did those items come from?
These were contained within the sexual assault kit for Lyric Woods.
And what, if anything, were you able to examine and conclude about those items?
Based on the quantification results obtained, no further analysis was performed on the samples taken from items 10-2, 10-3, and 10-7.
And can you describe that in a little more detail for the jury?
So when a sample stops at quantitation, that means I've measured the quantity or the amount of the DNA. And in this particular instance, there was only female DNA associated with those samples. So there was no male information that was foreign to female DNA.
Moving to lab item 10-4, what was that item?
10-4 was described as the oral swabs.
And from what source?
From Lyric Woods' sexual assault kit.
And can you describe the analysis you performed and what conclusions you were able to reach with regard to that item?
The DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the oral swabs is being interpreted as a single source profile. Lyric Woods, the donor of the known sample, is assumed as being the contributor of this profile. The DNA profiles from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile.
And, you mentioned fractions, and I believe that goes back to differential extraction. Can you explain why you performed a differential extraction on this item of evidence?
Since these items were contained within the sexual assault kit, it could be assumed that they could potentially come in contact with semen, and our procedures dictate how we handle those samples. So if you have this sense of, especially from kit items or sexual assault kit items, if it's associated with semen, you can perform a differential extraction under certain circumstances.
And does that change how you then process the fractions of the that you develop?
Yeah, so there are 2 separate samples which will yield different profiles. So the fraction 1 sample, remember, is usually what we're trying to determine from the individual for which the sample, the body, from the body the sample was collected. So usually that's what we're trying to isolate the DNA from the individual whose body the sample was collected from. The fraction 2 sample is more along the lines of if there is potential sperm cells. Remember that sperm has a tough outer coat, and so I have to use harsher chemicals to try to open the cell of the sperm to get any DNA out, if any is present.
So with regard to item 10-4, fraction 1, you're trying to isolate Lyric's DNA since she was the donor of the sample, is that?
So just trying to develop a DNA profile which may contain DNA from an individual the sample was collected from.
Okay. And then moving on to fraction 2 of that item, what, if any, determinations were you able to make?
The DNA profile from fraction 2 of the oral swabs is being interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors. The mixture contains 2 interpretable components. Lyric Woods, the donor of the known sample, item 10-1, is assumed as being contributor 1 of this DNA profile. The DNA profile from Devin Clark, item 13, is included as contributor 2 of this mixture. The DNA profile from Issiah Ross, item 14, is excluded as a contributor to the mixture. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for this statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual. The DNA mixture profile obtained from fraction 2 of the oral swabs, item 10-4, F2, is approximately 228 nonillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13, H1, than if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual, which is H2.
So the fact that Mr. Clark was included as a contributor to fraction 2, does that mean that there was semen or sperm present?
No, it doesn't mean that.
Okay. I guess, can you explain that a little further? What could that DNA have come from?
I can't say the sourcing of the DNA because I didn't do serological examinations. So the traditional serological exams are not routinely performed on sexual assault kit items of evidence because we now know that DNA testing is more sensitive than serological exams. So we don't do the front-end testing for a serology examination so that we can get a DNA profile. Because if every time you take a sample from an item, you're consuming it. And so if you consume it on the front end doing the serology testing, you may not have enough of it to produce a DNA profile.
We'll move to lab item 10-5. And what was that item?
Item 10-5 is described as the swabbing from the underpants.
And did you also perform a differential extraction on this item?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe what conclusions you were able to reach with regard to item 10-5?
The DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the swabbing from the underpants, 10-5, item 10-5, is being interpreted as a single source profile. Lyric Woods, the donor of the known sample, item 10-1, is assumed as being the contributor of this profile. The DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. No population frequency data were generated for the contribution of the DNA from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, to this fraction. The DNA profile obtained from fraction 2 of the swabbing from the underpants, item 10-5, is being interpreted as a mixture of two contributors. The mixture contains two interpretable components. Lyric Woods, the donor of the known sample, item 10-1, is assumed as being contributor 1 of the DNA profile. The DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark, item 13, is included as contributor 2 of this mixture. The DNA profile obtained from Issiah Ross, item 14, is excluded as a contributor to the mixture. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual. The DNA mixture profile obtained from fraction 2 of the swabbing from the underpants, item 10-5, is approximately 225 nonillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, H1, than if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual, H2.
And how about lab item 10-6? What was that item?
This was described as external genitalia swabs, and the results are the DNA profile obtained from the external genitalia swabs is being interpreted as a mixture of two contributors. The mixture contains two interpretable components. Lyric Woods, the donor of the known sample, item 10-1, is assumed as being contributor 1 of this DNA profile. DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark, item 13, is included as contributor 2 of this mixture. The DNA profile obtained from Issiah Ross, item 14, is excluded as a contributor to the mixture. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual. The mixture, DNA profile obtained from the external genitalia swabs, item 10-6, is approximately 909 septillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13, H1, than if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and an unknown unrelated individual, H2.
And both, I think I forgot to ask, both 10-5 and 10-6, were those also derived from Lyric Woods' sexual assault kit?
Yes, they were.
And then did you also examine some items derived from Devin Clark's sexual assault kit?
Yes, I did.
And looking at lab item 11-2, what was that item?
Item 11-2 is described as the anal and perianal swabs
From?
contained within the sexual assault kit from Devin Clark.
And can you describe the examination and conclusions you reached in regard to item 11-2?
I performed DNA analysis on this item, and a differential extraction was performed on item 11-2. So the DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the anal and perianal swabs, item 11-2, is being interpreted as a single source profile. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being contributor to this DNA profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. The DNA profile obtained from fraction 2 of the anal and perianal swabs is being interpreted as a mixture of two contributors. The mixture contains one interpretable component. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being contributor 1 of this DNA profile. Component 2 is inconclusive due to an insufficient quality of recovered DNA. No comparisons to reference profiles for either inclusion or exclusion can be reported on this component. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to the interpretable components of the mixture. No population frequency data were generated for the contribution of the DNA profile from Devin Clark, item 13, to fractions 1 and 2 of item 11-2.
Let's go ahead and take a break. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a morning recess. Please remember all of my instructions. If everybody please remain seated, we'll excuse our jury for a 15-minute recess. All right, all of our jurors are outside of the courtroom. Next time a phone goes off inside the courtroom, I will ask the bailiffs to seize it. So, did not think I needed to make this announcement every day. If you have a phone, make sure it's off. Anything else we need to address before we take the break?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing from the defense. Thank you, Judge.
All right, if I could see the attorneys up here, everybody else will be in recess for 15 minutes.
Will there be more recess?
Yes, thank you. All right, we've got everybody back with us. Ms. Orr, the witness is still.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Ivory, we were beginning to discuss the items derived from Mr. Clark's sexual assault kit. I believe we were on item 11-3. What was item 11-3?
It was described as the oral swabs.
And can you describe what, if any, conclusions you were able to reach about that item?
The DNA profile obtained from fractions 1 and 2 of the oral swabs, item 11-3, is being interpreted as a single source profile. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being the contributor to this DNA profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14, respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. No population frequency data were generated for the contribution of the DNA profile from Devin Clark, item 13, to fractions 1 and 2 of item 11-3.
And looking at item 11-4, what was that item?
These were swabbings from underpants.
And can you describe what, if any, conclusions you were able to reach about that item?
The DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the swabbing from the underpants, item 11-4, is being interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors. The mixture contains 2 interpretable components. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being contributor 1 of this DNA profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods is included as contributor 2 of this mixture. The DNA profile obtained from Issiah Ross, item 14, is excluded as a contributor to the mixture. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and Lyric Woods, item 10-1, or Hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and an unknown unrelated individual. The mixture DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the swabbing from the underpants is approximately 4.41 quintillion times more likely if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and Lyric Woods, item 10-1, H1, than if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and an unknown unrelated individual, H2. The DNA profile obtained from fraction 2 of the swabbing from the underpants, item 11-4, is being interpreted as a single source profile. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being the contributor to this DNA profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. No population frequency data were generated for the contribution of the DNA profile from Devin Clark, item 13, to fraction 2 of item 11-4.
And how about with regard to item 11-5?
The DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the external genitalia swabs, item 11-5, is being interpreted as a mixture of two contributors. The mixture contains two interpretable components. Devin Clark, the donor of the known sample, item 13, is assumed as being contributor 1 of this DNA profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, is included as contributor 2 of this mixture. The DNA profile obtained from Issiah Ross, item 14, is excluded as a contributor to the mixture. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and Lyric Woods, item 10-1, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and an unknown unrelated individual. The mixture DNA profile obtained from fraction 1 of the external genitalia swabs, item 11-5, is approximately 5.56 million times more likely if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and Lyric Woods, item 10-1, which is our H1, than if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, and an unknown unrelated individual, which is H2. Based on the quantification results obtained, no further analysis was performed from the sample taken from fraction 2 of 11-5.
And was that the last item that you analyzed and reported on in the June 14th, 2024 report?
Yes, it is.
Okay, you might guess by the fact that I'm sitting here that math and science are not my strong suit. So I want to understand this statistical probability a little bit more. Are you allowed to say that a DNA is a match?
No.
Okay, and why not?
Because the way the statistic is structured, the DNA results can support an explanation of the evidence or an alternate explanation of the evidence. That's all I can say.
And so hypothesis 1 for all of these items that have, let's talk about specifically two interpretable components. Your first hypothesis is it's the source item and then another known DNA sample, right?
For which item are you referring to?
Well, let's pick an example because that'll be easier. Let's talk about item number 7. Well, no, that's not a great one either. Fraction 2 of item 10-5.
Yes.
Okay, so what was your statistical analysis with regard to that item?
The DNA results for 10-5, which is the fraction 2 of the swabbing from the underpants, the DNA results supported hypothesis 1, which is the evidence originating from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, and Devin Clark, item 13. So that just means that the DNA results supported that explanation of the evidence.
And the number that you are giving for this item, it was 225 nonillion times more likely. In layman's terms, what does that mean?
So that's a really large number. And Remember, I told you that the likelihood ratio when the DNA results support the explanation of inclusion has to be 1,000 or higher. So 1,000 has 3 zeros after it. A nonillion has 30 zeros behind it. So you only need 1,000 to support the DNA results to support that inclusionary hypothesis. This is significantly higher than that.
And for all the items discussed in your report of June 14th, I think the lowest was in the millions. Was that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. Following your examination of these items discussed in your report June 14th of 2024, what did you do with those items?
Those items were returned to a vault for return to the submitting agency for all of the items that were for the exterior and the interior of the vehicle, as well as the slides that I created and some DNA extracts from those items. The kit items, the sexual assault kits for Devin Clark and Lyric Woods, were retained for further analysis.
And then did you generate an additional report on October 25th of 2024?
Yes.
What items did you examine as a part of your analysis for that report?
These were various items of evidence that I received that were described as hair roots removed from item 11-4 as well as 11-8.
And so were these all lab-generated items?
Yes, these were.
And where did you receive them from?
I received them from the main forensic biology evidence vault.
And can you describe what examinations you did with this evidence?
I performed DNA analysis on those items.
And what results and conclusions did you reach from your examination?
Bear with me. There were 55 items. So I performed DNA analysis, and for the first set of items, items 11-4-1-1, 11-4-1-2, 11-8-2 through 11-8-6, 11-8-8 through 11-8-13, 11-8-15 through 11-8-24, 11-8-39, and 11-8-53. Based on the quantification results obtained, no further analysis were performed on those items.
And for, I should have asked before you started, but 11-4, what was that item?
11-4, those were from the underpants from the kit from Devin Clark.
And how about 11-8?
11-8 was from the pubic hair combings from Devin Clark's sexual assault kit.
Okay. And so the remaining item numbers then 11-8-1, 8-7, 8-14, 8-25 through 38, 8-40, and 8-52. What, if any, conclusions were you able to reach with regard to those items?
The DNA profiles obtained from the hair roots removed from hair in item 8, items 11, 8-1, 8-7, 8-14, 8-25, 8-38, 8-40 through 8-52 is being interpreted as a single source profile. The interpretation of this profile is being conditioned using the DNA profile from Devin Clark, item 13, as contributor 1. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14, respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. No profile frequency data were generated for the contribution of the DNA profile from Devin Clark to those items.
So with regard to your analysis of these items, essentially no DNA was found that would not be consistent with Mr. Clark. Is that fair to say?
So all of the evidence profiles showed the same information as the evidence or as the profile obtained from Devin Clark.
And then what did you do with that evidence when you were finished with it?
All of the hair roots would have been consumed in analysis, and so the only things that would have been returned would be the extracts from the first round of testing, as well as the testing done in this report, as well as the slides from the original round of testing.
And then moving forward to your report dated November 21st of 2024, did you receive additional items of evidence to test?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
For the record, these will be state's exhibits 40, 41, 45, 60, and 74. The three items previously admitted as states 40, 41, and 45 are the rocks collected from the crime scene. State 60 is an additional DNA swab from the GMC terrain. And state 74 is the cutout of the inner roof liner from the GMC terrain. And Mr. Ivory, I'll ask you if you recognize these items.
Yes, I do recognize these items.
And what are these items?
Laboratory item 16 is described as a DNA swab from the center console of the GMC. Item 17 are described as rocks with red stains in the middle left side of access road. Item 18 is rocks with red stain in middle right side of access road. Item 19, rocks with red stain on right side of access road. And item 20, a piece of inner roof liner of the white GMC terrain.
And are these the items you analyzed and reported on in your report dated November 21st of 2024?
Yes.
And how are you able to recognize them?
By the case number, their item numbers, as well as my initials and dates placed on those packages.
Now, Mr. Ivory, when you receive an item in the lab, like these rocks from the crime scene, how do you go about making that so you can analyze them?
So I will remove the item from the packaging, and I will, if I see any reddish brown staining, so these items were subjected to the Kastle-Meyer test. So I would have observed a reddish brown stain on the items. I would have taken a sample of that and then performed the presumptive test to indicate if blood was present or not chemically. And that's what I did in this case.
And we'll go in the order of your report here. So lab item 16, the DNA swab from the center console of the GMC, and lab item 20, the interior roof liner of the GMC. Can you describe what, if any, conclusions you were able to reach about those items?
Yes. Examination of a sample taken from the swab from the center console, item 16, and a general rubbing taken from the roof liner cutout, item 20, using the Kastle-Meyer test failed to reveal chemical indications for the presence of blood. No confirmatory blood testing was performed and no further analysis was performed on those items.
And how about item 7, lab item 17?
Examination of a sample taken from the rocks with red stains in the middle of left side of the access road, item 17, using the Kastle-Meyer test, gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. No confirmatory blood testing was performed. A swabbing was taken for DNA analysis. The DNA profile obtained from the swabbing from the rocks with the red stain in the middle left side of the access road, item 17, is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark, item 13, is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from one unknown, unrelated individual. The DNA profile obtained from the swabbing from the rocks with the red stain in the middle left side of the access road, item 17, is approximately 149 nonillion times more likely if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, which is our H1, than if it originated from one unknown, unrelated individual, which is H2.
And in your report, you discuss items 18 and 19 together. So could you walk us through your conclusions with regard to those items?
Examination of samples taken from the rocks with the red stain in the middle right side of the access road and the rocks with red stain on the right side of the access road, items 18 and 19 respectively, using the Kastle-Meyer test, gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. No confirmatory blood testing was performed. A swabbing was taken from each item for DNA analysis. The DNA profile obtained from the swabbings from the rocks with the red stain in the middle right side of the access road and the rocks with the red stain on the right side of the access road, items 18 and 19 respectively, is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Devin Clark, item 13, is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Lyric Woods and Issiah Ross, items 10-1 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Devin Clark, item 13, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from one unknown, unrelated individual. The DNA profile obtained from the swabbings from the rocks with the red stain in the middle right side of the access road and the rocks with the red stains on the right side of the access road, items 18 and 19 respectively, is approximately 171 nonillion times more likely if it originated from Devin Clark, item 13, H1, than if it originated from one unknown, unrelated individual, H2.
And following your examination of this evidence, what did you do with it?
The items would have been returned to the submitting agency.
Looking now at your report dated September 5th of 2025, did you receive additional items for testing in reference to this case?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
For the record, this is states 61, 62, 63, 64, and 65, all DNA swabs from the white GMC. And Mr. Ivory, I'll hand you these items and ask if you recognize them.
Yes, I do recognize these items.
And are these the items you analyzed in your report dated September 5th of 2025?
Yes, they are.
Just why only 5 items per report?
There are submission guidelines to our laboratory. Initially, in certain cases like this one, their initial submission can be up to 10 items. Sometimes you can get an exception, but any subsequent submissions are 5 items or less.
And walking through these items, which are lab items 21 through 25, items 21, 22, 23, and 25 are grouped in your report. Can you describe what, if any, conclusions you're able to reach with regard to those items?
Items 21, 22, 23, and 25. Examination of the swab samples taken from the white GMC from the right side of the center console, item 21, the lower right center of console, item 22, lower middle portion of center console, item 23, and the inside door pocket of the right rear door, item 25, using the Kastle-Meyer test, failed to reveal chemical indications for the presence of blood. No confirmatory blood testing was performed.
And was there any further analysis done on those items?
No, there was not.
And taking a look at item 24, the swabbing from the right front rim of the white GMC, can you describe what conclusions you're able to reach with regard to that item?
Examination of a sample taken from the swabs from the right front rim of the white GMC, item 24, using the Kastle-Meyer test, gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. No confirmatory blood testing was performed. The DNA profile obtained from the swabs from the right front rim of the white GMC, item 24, is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13 and 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to the profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from one unknown unrelated individual. The DNA profile obtained from the swabs from the right rim of the white GMC, item 24, is approximately 7.74 decillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, H1, than if it originated from one unknown unrelated individual, H2.
Now, I think you've said it a couple of times, but I'll ask you here with regard to item 24. Why was no confirmatory blood testing performed after the Kastle-Meyer test?
So generally, we try to strive for the DNA profile. So the more you consume of an item, the less there is for DNA. So it is not traditional for us to cut something multiple times in order to say something is a particular body fluid because you may not get a DNA profile at the end. So it's more to conserve the sample for DNA analysis.
And once you finished examining the lab items 21 through 25, what did you do with those items?
Those items would have been returned to the submitting agency.
And finally, taking a look at your report dated January 7th of 2026, did you receive additional items to test in regard to this case?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
This is states 66, 67, and 72 for the record. All DNA swabs from the GMC terrain. And Mr. Ivory, I'll ask if you recognize these items.
Yes, I recognize these items.
And are these the items that you examined with regard to your report dated January 7th of 2026?
Yes, it is.
And how are you able to recognize them?
I recognize them by the case number, their item numbers, as well as the initials and dates that I placed on the items.
And these were designated lab items 26, 27, and 28. Could you describe your conclusions with regard to lab item 26?
The partial DNA profile obtained from the swab from the bottom back portion of the right rear passenger door of the white GMC Terrain, item 26, is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13, 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from one unknown, unrelated individual. The partial DNA profile obtained from the swab from the bottom back portion of the right rear passenger door of the white GMC Terrain, item 26, is approximately 25.9 sextillion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, H1, than if it originated from one unknown, unrelated individual.
And how about for item 27?
The partial DNA profile obtained from the swab from the right rear passenger door of the white GMC Terrain below the handle, item 27, is being interpreted as a single source profile. The DNA profile obtained from Lyric Woods, item 10-1, is included as a possible contributor to this profile. The DNA profiles obtained from Devin Clark and Issiah Ross, items 13, 14 respectively, are excluded as contributors to this profile. Given the evidence, the following propositions were considered for the statistical calculation. Hypothesis 1, the evidence originated from Lyric Woods, items 10-1, or hypothesis 2, the evidence originated from one unknown, unrelated individual. The partial DNA profile obtained from the swab from the right rear passenger door of white GMC Terrain below the handle, item 27, is approximately 18.4 billion times more likely if it originated from Lyric Woods than if it originated from one unknown, unrelated individual.
And what, if any, conclusions were you able to reach with regard to item 28?
Based on quantification results obtained, no further analysis was performed on the sample taken from item 28.
And what did you do with these evidence items once your analysis was complete?
I would have returned them to the submitting agency.
If I could have just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have for this witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Witnesses with you, Mr. Trapp.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Ivory, sounds like you did your fair share of testing in this case.
Yes, I did.
Since we were talking about the testing on January 7th, 2026, I figure I'll start there and work my way backwards. Is that all right?
That's fine.
So, in this testing, there were DNA swabs from the GMC vehicle. Is that right?
That's correct.
The first test, item 26, was this testing of the right rear passenger door of the white GMC Terrain. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you given any indication if this was the inside of the door or the outside of the door?
No.
Now, item 26, you said there was a single source profile. Is that right?
Yes.
When you described your testing for item 26, did you perform the Kastle-Meyer test?
No, I did not.
And so is that because you did not see the presence of blood?
No, that was because the indication was for DNA analysis, not presumptive blood testing and DNA analysis.
All right. And so when you get these requests to test an item, it'll specifically say look for blood or don't look for blood, or is that something you do instinctively, or is that part of your protocol?
In general, yes. Sometimes you do have to get clarification from submitting agencies as to what type of testing should be performed.
Okay. Now, do you have any indication in your notes that you weren't supposed to do the Kastle-Meyer test, or you were only supposed to look for DNA? Do you know what specifically you're supposed to do with this rear back passenger door?
May I refer to my notes?
Yes, please.
This would have been... So no reddish-brown staining was noted.
Okay. When you are performing these tests and you're asked to identify, and I know we're not going to use the word match, but kind of identify with these probabilities whose DNA it's more likely it belongs to, are you ever tasked with determining what this actual item is you're testing? I guess a better way of stating it is, if you started and saw a red stain, you said you don't do a confirmatory blood test because you don't want to waste the material. But the idea is that this red stain may be blood. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. But if you don't see a red stain and then you begin to test for DNA, do you then take any further steps to determine that this item is, let's say it was a sexual assault kit, this item was semen, or this item was sweats, or this item was from a hair? Do you understand what I'm saying?
So are you asking if body fluid testing is done on the back end after DNA analysis?
What I'm asking is, do you know what you're testing when you're testing for DNA?
You mean the actual items of evidence?
Yes, sir.
I can only go by the description. So say if it's swab evidence, how it was collected, I'm not privy to. So all I have is the item before me, which is contained in the packaging, which has a description on it, and then I compare that to the inventory list of items that were submitted to see if they are the same.
Thank you. So in this instance, when you confirmed the DNA in item 26 was Lyric Woods, you don't know what the original item, you don't know what created that DNA, other than the fact it came from Lyric Woods based on a probability of 25.9 sextillion.
So these DNA results support the inclusionary hypothesis, and the level of support that was given was well above 1,000 for that inclusionary hypothesis.
Yes, sir. Thank you. But looking at, say, item 28. Item 28, there was no further analysis performed based on the quantification results. Does that mean there just wasn't enough material to test for DNA?
That's correct. There wasn't, so there are thresholds, and if it doesn't meet a certain threshold, we know that you won't get a good DNA profile from that. So we don't produce a DNA profile from those types of samples. There just isn't enough DNA there.
Okay. And then something like item 27, that's like the rear handle of the GMC?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yet again, there wasn't a Kastle-Meyer test.
Correct.
And so that's to assume that there wasn't the presence of blood that you visually saw or you weren't asked to test for it. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so when you have an item like a door handle or maybe they took a test from a table or something like that and there isn't the presence of blood, do you have any indication of what this item may have came from?
No, I don't.
Okay. Let's go back to our test on September, I think the next one is, let's do September 5th. September the 5th, 2025. All right, so on September the 5th, 2025, there were 5 items that you compared. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And then you had your comparisons for Lyric Woods, Devin Clark, and Issiah Ross used in this sample. Is that right?
Yes.
You had made a mention that when people make these submissions to the lab, they have like this initial threshold of maybe submitting 10 items, and then after that, the next submissions have to be 5, right?
Yes.
All right, and so this is a 5 order or a 5 submission portion. When you did the testings of 21, 22, 23, and 25, you grouped them all together. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your report.
That is correct.
And is that typical for you to group multiple items together if they have a similar result?
If they have the same result, yes.
All right. And in this instance, you performed the Kastle-Meyer test on items 21, 22, 23, and 25, and that result was negative, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you get a negative result for a Kastle-Meyer test, that means there isn't the presence of blood.
It doesn't necessarily mean that. It is a chemical test, so there could be things that below that, but it gives me no indication that it would be a good source for DNA analysis. So you need enough material to produce that profile, and if you get a positive indication, that's a good source, or if possible, to produce a DNA profile.
All right. So the Kastle-Meyer test in and of itself does not determine the presence of blood. Is that what you're saying?
It does determine if you have a chemical indication for the presence of blood. It's used as a screening tool just so that I can have a high confidence that if I take this sample forward, I may be able to produce a DNA profile. That's why it's used.
Okay. So item 21 was the right side of the center console of the white GMC. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you did the Kastle-Meyer test on that right side of the center console, the Kastle-Meyer test was negative. Is that right?
That is correct.
And item 24 was different, and that's why you put it in a separate portion of the report, because that tested positive. Is that right?
Yes, that gave a chemical indication that blood was present.
Okay. And in this instance, did you see and visually see that there was a red substance? Were you told? How did you know to look for this or test for the Kastle-Meyer on item 24?
May I refer to my notes for that?
Yes, please.
So. The appearance of a reddish-brown stain.
And that would be something that you noticed, or that was something that you were told existed?
That I noticed.
But in this testing on September the 5th, there were 4 items. These were all in the interior of the car, and there was no presence of blood from the Castle-Meyer test. Is that correct?
It failed to reveal the chemical indications for the presence of blood, yes.
And there was 1 item, and that was the exterior, that tire rim, and that did test positive, correct?
That is correct.
And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about some of these tests, but do you recall, by looking at all the tests, the 5 tests that you did, or 5 test dates, I'm sorry, that you did, ever finding the presence of blood through the Castle-Meyer test for anything inside the GMC terrain?
I do not recall.
Okay.
Let me look through my reports, please.
Yes, sir.
Nothing described as being from the interior of the vehicle gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
Your Honor, I'm kind of at a point where I could keep going or we could begin.
You have about 10 more minutes worth, or you need a section?
It would be more than 10, but it's up to the court.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch recess. So remember, as you head out into the world, the rules: 1, have lunch together. Just don't talk about this case. Number 2, don't talk to anybody else, whether they're an AI or online or an actual human. Remember, don't let anybody talk to you or around you about this case. If anybody attempts to do that or does that, if you please let the bailiffs know, and I will take care of that particular problem. Number 3, no independent research. Don't look anything up. Don't Google it. Don't ask your aunt, who always knows the answer to all those important questions, anything. We're getting toward the end of the state's case here, so remember that last bit. You have not heard all the evidence yet. You have not heard the arguments of counsel, and you've not heard the law that I'm going to tell you you need to apply to the facts in this particular case. So with that, I hope you all have a good lunch. We'll start back at 2 o'clock. So please be here at least 5 minutes before that so we can get you all situated and ready to go. Everybody else remain seated. At this time, we'll excuse our jury. All right, all our jurors are outside the courtroom. Anything we need to address at this time? Madam Dia?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Trapp?
No, I was trying to think if there was a bench conference we needed to recreate.
I don't think so. Let me double check, though. I didn't write anything down.
Okay.
So I think we're all right. But if you remember, we'll put that on the record when we get back from lunch.
Nothing else, Judge.
All right, I've emailed you all potential very rough draft, potential jury instructions. You both have a hard copy of that at this time too. Not necessarily going to reach that, and even if we do, not be for a little while, but you both have copies to start reviewing. All right. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing for the defense. Thank you, Judge.
All right, we'll be in recess until 2 p.m.